The Persians stood behind walls of spears dug into the hillside, watching the enemy below. Twice the Arabs had attacked and twice they had failed. Now the desert warriors were breaking camp. Wagons rolled away, tents fell, and dust rose on the horizon. Fīrūzan smiled. The enemy was retreating. Victory was certain. But what the Persians didn't see was that this retreat was a trap. This is the Battle of Nahavand. In the year 642 AD, the ancient Sassanid Empire was nearing its end. But it didn't know it yet. For centuries, Persia had stood as one of the two great powers of the known world. It had fought Rome and Byzantium to a standstill for generations, traded across continents, and ruled from Mesopotamia to India. But now the empire was collapsing under the weight of its own history. After decades of war with the Byzantines, the empire was exhausted. Its last great king, Khosrow II, had pushed too far and then fallen to rebellion. His successors, mere children, puppets, or victims, died one after another in a spiral of assassinations. And then came a new threat, born in the Arabian deserts. The Rashidun Caliphate exploded outward under Caliphs Abu Bakr and Umar, carrying with it not only armies, but a new religion and a new political order. In 636, the Arab army had crushed the Sassanids at al-Qadisiyyah, seizing Ctesiphon and forcing the Emperor Yazdegerd III to flee east. But the Sassanids were not yet finished. In a final effort to save the empire, Yazdegerd called upon the governors of the east to raise a massive field army. Command was given to Fīrūzan, a veteran general from the house of Mihran, one of the great noble families of Iran. Fīrūzan understood this campaign was not just a battle. It was the last chance to stop the tide. The army he raised was the last of its kind: provincial garrisons, royal troops, conscripted farmers, and the elite Savaran cavalry, who had once brought emperors to their knees. Some sources place the army's size as high as 100,000, almost certainly inflated, but still massive by the standards of the day. Fīrūzan chose to make his stand near the town of Nahavand, in the western mountains of Iran. It was the perfect place to prepare for a defensive battle. With hills to anchor his position and high ground to control the approach, he ordered his men to dig in. News of this force reached Caliph Umar in Medina. The Persian threat was gathering again, perhaps for one last campaign. Umar responded by appointing Nuʿmān ibn Muqarrin al-Muzani to lead a preemptive strike. Nuʿmān was not one of the Prophet's famous companions, nor a legendary general like Khalid ibn al-Walid, but he was respected, reliable, cool-headed, and experienced from campaigns across Iraq and Arabia. He led a mixed force of around 30,000 to 40,000 troops drawn from Kufa, Basra, and Syria, veterans of earlier conquests who had faced both Roman and Persian might. Nuʿmān moved quickly toward Nahavand. The decisive battle was coming, and he meant to choose the time and place. The ground outside Nahavand was steep, broken, and cruel. The Persian army, already encamped in the foothills, controlled the higher terrain. Fīrūzan had ordered defensive measures built into the slope: trenches, palisades, ditches, and stakes to block cavalry. Infantry manned these outer works in deep ranks, armed with spears and large wicker shields. Behind them stood ranks of archers and slingers, ready to unleash volleys downhill at any approaching enemy. Farther behind, scattered among rear positions or holding the flanks, were the Savaran, the heavy cavalry of Persia. Clad in lamellar armor, wielding lances, swords, and maces, they were fast, well-trained, and feared across the region. But in this setup, they were placed as a mobile reserve, waiting for the enemy to either breach the line or break themselves trying. Fīrūzan's formation was static but strong. He had no plans to maneuver or chase. His army's size, combined with the terrain, made it almost impossible to flank him. He would let the Arabs come to him and bleed them dry against his walls. The Arab army, arriving on lower ground, was at a clear disadvantage. Nuʿmān ordered his troops to encamp within sight of the Persian line. But unlike his enemy, he had no intention of fighting a siege. The Rashidun army was not built for slow war. It was fast, mobile, and aggressive. Nuʿmān arranged his infantry in wide, loose ranks. Armed with short spears, swords, and hide-covered shields, they were experienced in open battle but not in uphill assaults. On the flanks stood Arab cavalry, lighter and more flexible than the Persian savaran. They wore little armor, but they were quick, deadly, and drilled to respond to battlefield shifts. The terrain, however, did not favor them. Between the two armies lay a harsh, rising plain that funneled into the Persian position. The Arabs would need to attack uphill, under missile fire, against a dug-in enemy, while knowing that Persian cavalry could launch downhill countercharges at any moment. Still, Nuʿmān knew he had little choice. If he retreated, Persia would recover. If he waited, the enemy would fortify further. And so, after 3 days of careful observation, skirmishes, and probing the enemy lines, he made his decision. At dawn on the 4th day, the Arab banners rose, drums sounded, infantry formed into assault columns, cavalry pulled in to protect the flanks. The Rashidun army began its advance. Up the slope, the Persians waited in silence. And then came the first wave. The Arab army surged forward. Nuʿmān's infantry columns marched up the uneven ground, shields raised, spears ready. As they ascended the incline, they were met with a storm of arrows. Persian archers positioned high behind the trenches, loosed volley after volley. Stones from slingers followed, cracking shields and shattering morale. Still, the Arab troops advanced. They reached the Persian defenses, wooden stakes, trenches, and walls of spears, and collided with the Sassanid line. The fighting was brutal. Arab infantry tried to push through the narrow openings, but they were met with heavy resistance. Persian foot soldiers, better positioned and reinforced from behind, held firm. After fierce hand-to-hand combat, Nuʿmān ordered a retreat. The Arab lines pulled back, reorganized, and prepared for a second assault. Nuʿmān understood the risk. He could not afford to let his troops become demoralized. He needed to break the Persian line, or make them move. So he tried again. The second attack was just as violent. Arab infantry advanced under missile fire, supported now by cavalry attempting to harass the Persian flanks. But the terrain worked against them. Every step uphill cost energy. Every moment under fire cost lives. The savaran, though held in reserve, threatened to strike at any time. Once again, the assault broke against Persian defenses. The Rashidun army withdrew, bloodied and frustrated. By now, Persian morale had grown. Fīrūzan stood confident, his lines intact, his defenses unbroken. The Arabs had tried twice and failed. Victory, he thought, was within reach. But Nuʿmān was not done. His failure was part of a larger plan. That night, the Arab camp began to stir in strange ways. Tents were taken down. Campfires were left to smolder. Wagons moved southward. Cavalry units scattered. Wounded men were carried away. It looked chaotic, like the beginning of a full retreat. It was theater. This was no disorderly flight. Nuʿmān had ordered a feigned withdrawal, a calculated risk meant to draw the Persians out of their fortified position. The Arabs had tried and failed to storm the hill. Now they would try to fight on their own terms, on open ground. Fīrūzan's scouts reported the retreat. The enemy was leaving. The time to strike was now. Persian officers disagreed. Some warned against abandoning their fortifications. But Fīrūzan believed the Arabs were broken, and that delay would only allow them to regroup. So he ordered the advance. The entire Persian army began to move downhill. Infantry first, then archers, then the Savaran. The trenches and fortifications that had served them so well, these were now left behind. The Sassanids spread into the plains in pursuit of what they thought was a fleeing army. But Nuʿmān had already chosen his battlefield. On the flat terrain below the hills, Arab infantry regrouped and formed ranks. They no longer had to fight uphill. Here they could spread out, maneuver, and face the Persians in a straight fight. As the Persian army descended, its formation began to stretch. The battle lines lost their tightness. Some units advanced faster than others. The pursuit became uneven. And at just the right moment, Nuʿmān struck. Arab infantry wheeled around and faced the pursuers. Cavalry regiments flanked both wings. The army reformed in an instant. The retreat was over. Now it was battle on level ground. The Persians were caught mid-transition. Their infantry quickly tried to reset ranks, but they had been lured away from their strongholds. Their archers couldn't find high ground. Their cavalry was still maneuvering into position. Then came the second phase of Nuʿmān's plan. From a shallow fold in the landscape, a depression in the terrain, possibly behind a ridge or gully, a hidden Arab cavalry force emerged. These were likely lighter horsemen, sent to flank or disrupt the Persian rear while the front was engaged. They weren't enough to cause collapse, but their sudden appearance sparked chaos. Persian supply wagons and rear troops scattered. A portion of the Savaran turned around to meet the threat. The result was disorganized cavalry combat behind the Persian line, just as the front was under attack. Fīrūzan tried to restore order, but the damage was done. His army was split between fighting to the front and rear. The archers had no lines of sight, and now, with Arab forces pushing aggressively from the center, the Sassanid infantry began to lose cohesion. Nuʿmān, leading from the front, pressed the attack. Then fate intervened. In the thick of combat, Nuʿmān ibn Muqarrin was killed, either by arrow or blade. The reports are unclear. What is clear is that his body was quickly covered with a cloak, and command passed quietly to Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, a veteran trusted by both soldiers and the Caliph. The concealment worked. Arab morale did not break. In fact, the pressure intensified. With Persian cavalry engaged to the rear, and their infantry stretched thin and isolated, the Persian lines began to collapse. Not from encirclement, but from fracture. The center broke first, then the wings. Panic spread. Some Persian soldiers tried to flee back uphill, but their old camp was now abandoned. Others ran for nearby towns. Those still fighting were overwhelmed. In the chaos, Fīrūzan himself was killed, possibly trampled while trying to regroup. With both commanders dead and no clear chain of command, the Sassanid army broke completely. The final army of the Sassanid Empire was no more. In the days that followed, Arab forces mopped up the battlefield. Thousands of Persians were captured. Many more were killed in the retreat. Nahavand had not been a siege. It had been a collapse. Yazdegerd III, far to the east, now had no armies left. He fled further into Iran, eventually reaching Merv and Balkh, where he would live as a fugitive, hunted, abandoned, and eventually assassinated years later. With no field army and no central control, Persia opened up. One after another, cities surrendered. Governors pledged loyalty or fled. The Zoroastrian temples still burned their sacred fires, but their protectors were gone. For the Arabs, Nahavand was remembered as al-Fath al-Futuh, the Victory of Victories. It did not end with a grand siege or a royal surrender. It ended with a trap in the open field, a hidden cavalry, and the fall of an empire. Persia's story would continue, but the Sassanid chapter ended at Nahavand.